From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris returned to the swing states a day after Harris delivered her closing argument speech from the Ellipse, only to start her day today reacting to President Biden's garbage comment that Republicans call an insult.
But let me be clear, I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for.
We'll talk this hour with Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan following the Supreme Court's decision to keep RFK Jr. on the ballot in both her state and Wisconsin, where the candidates are spending time today. And we'll also be joined by Republican Congressman Chuck Fleischmann of Tennessee, a day before early voting wraps in his state. We'll talk about the campaign in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Thanks for joining us on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. 6 days out, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are blanketing the swing states once again. But before the vice president ever got on the airplane this morning, she was called to respond to a comment that President Biden made last night that appeared to call supporters of Donald Trump, quote, garbage.
First of all, he clarified his comments, but let me be clear, I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. As you heard in my speech last night and continuously throughout my career, I believe that the work that I do is about representing all the people, whether they support me or not. And as President of the United States, I will be a president for all Americans, whether you vote for me or not.
The vice president's remarks follow an attempt by the White House and the president himself to clarify his remarks, saying that he was referring specifically to the comedian who insulted Puerto Ricans, calling Puerto Rico an island of floating trash during a Trump rally last weekend. Joining us now, Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisko and Bloomberg's Texas bureau chief, Julie Fine. It's great to have both of you with us. Michelle, your thoughts on this? We had a clarification, or at least an attempt to, from the White House. A lot of people thought this was an opportunity for Kamala Harris to at last distance herself from Joe Biden. Did she do that?
Well, now you're seeing where both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, are finding that the fallout from this original remark at the Madison Square Garden rally, the Trump rally, is, in a way, they're each trying to chest beat on what they think is an advantage here. First, it was the Democrats clearly seeing an opening, trying to rally Latino voters, especially in Pennsylvania, and Puerto Rican voters in pockets of critical areas of the state. And now you see Republicans kind of taking advantage of this Biden comment that was very unhelpful and for some Democrats reminded them of a similar infamous deplorables comment by Hillary Clinton that, helped kind of move sentiment in the other direction. So Harris clearly trying to get ahead there, as you saw in the clip, and trying to kind of stand herself apart from the president, something that she's not been so ready to do in other ways throughout this process, as she has clearly stated she respects the president's decision to step out of the race and wants to kind of laud the achievements of the administration. But here has to distance herself from this gaffe.
Well, you make a great point. Joe Biden's not on the ballot, and I guess that's where we find ourselves here. Julie Fine, once again, talking about rhetoric that has nothing to do with policy, the noise that's taking our attention away from Kamala Harris's address last night. Is this just a big waste of time?
Well, I don't think she has a choice. I mean, she has to address it today because that is going to be the first question that she's obviously going to have. She also had to address it in a way that she separated herself, but didn't totally separate herself because she doesn't want to alienate any voters. So she got it done. She did it quickly. And yes, it did take attention away from her address last night. It took a lot of attention away from her address last night. Now what she has to do and do quickly is pivot back as fast as she can and get back on message for the final 5 days.
Well, there you go. And at today's White House briefing, a bit more of what Kamala Harris, I think, would like for us to be talking about. Jared Bernstein, who chairs the White House Council of Economic Advisors, made an appearance at the White House news briefing and reacted to today's third quarter GDP data, getting us back to the economy. Let's listen.
Despite the recent positive data flow, let me be crystal clear that there are no victory laps here. We know that prices are still too high for families, making our cost-cutting agenda as urgent as ever, and we will continue to fight to lower costs in key areas, including healthcare, prescription drugs, childcare, housing, and more.
Economic growth is what the Harris campaign, I think, would like to be associated with. By the way, most people see Jared Bernstein walk into the briefing room and they do think it's a victory lap. How important is the cycle of economic data this week will culminate with jobs on Friday to people making their final decisions, if there are any left?
Well, I'm not sure how important it is to voters in this process. I mean, I think we can, just to put on my old hat as an economics reporter, it was always giving me shudders to see this overly politicized. And of course, in election season, everyone's going to claim victory over the numbers or try to, paper over them if they're bad, if they don't want to take credit for them. Here you see, Bernstein kind of reflecting what has been the Biden administration mantra for months, which is good progress. We still got a ways to go. We're not discounting people's concerns over inflation, which I think politically is probably the smartest thing to do. But if you look at the report itself, it seemed to kind of continue the trend of fairly solid growth, good consumer spending. There were a little bit of quirks around defense spending that still have yet to be explained. But, economists are generally agreeing it was a pretty good report. Now, how much the president can take credit for that, how much Harris in turn can take credit for that is up for question. But, of course, we are going to see those portrayals out on the campaign trail. Meanwhile, Trump saying today it's a disaster, economy is still a disaster, and saying that this report was a disappointment, which, if you take the strict survey median that we had, maybe missed by 0.1%. But
you can call it slower than expected, but it's still 2.8% growth. Julie, fine. I filled up my car on the way to work this morning for $2.84. And we've got a jobs report that is expected on Friday to show the lowest pre-election unemployment in 24 years. What's more important, the data at hand, the way people feel about the economy, or who offended whom last?
I think in the short term, who offended whom last. However, you fill up you fill up your gas, you get your groceries. If those are coming down, I think that outweighs anything in terms of what happens in the daily news cycle. Now, if you think they're too high, that still may outweigh everything in the daily news cycle. So I think people are thinking with the economy, but this also is a distraction that candidates simply do not want to deal with.
That's true, and they're going to keep playing the game. I suspect for the rest, we've got 6 days left. This is the definition of silly season, right? There have been questions about an October surprise. Michelle, you've covered a couple of campaigns. I can't count how many surprises we've had in October. Does this end up being the Madison Square Garden insult and the reply from Joe Biden, the definition of this cycle's surprise?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think the so-called October surprise has become, something that's in the eye of the beholder, where in normal election cycles, which were, I think, long past, you could kind of agree this foreign policy event or this, domestic incident was clearly an October surprise. I think both campaigns have reason to point to this Puerto Rico comment fallout as their own October surprise, but it's not clear how much that's actually going to weigh on the minds of voters, many of whom have already voted.
Well, that's a great point, by the way. About a third of the nation already deciding before any of this took place. Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisko and Bloomberg's Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine, thank you so much for the insights. Coming up on Balance of Power, we'll have a closer look at the state of the race in Michigan with Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens. Coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio as we turn to the swing state of Michigan, the state that may well decide this election. More than 30% of active registered voters are already done. They've already cast a ballot, either by absentee or early voting. That number from the Michigan Department of State represents more than 2 million voters in a state that is crucial, of course, for both candidates. Joining us right now, someone who knows a lot about this, Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan. Congresswoman, welcome back. It's good to see you as you push for a Harris victory. Are these early voting numbers painting a picture of what might come for you, or just giving you more anxiety with 6 days to go?
Well, I'll tell you, we're going straight towards the finish line, Joe, and we have to. Look, there's a lot to be optimistic about from early vote numbers, particularly low propensity voters that are coming from areas where we feel very optimistic about Kamala Harris, particularly Detroit. My county, Oakland County, always has a high vote turnout, and people are voting in droves. I went on Saturday to early vote thinking I'd just swing in and be able to run to my next event. And there was an over an hour wait to vote in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan for early vote. And we certainly know that the push that the Harris campaign is making, a very focused, dedicated push on Michigan, is working. Donald Trump is all over the place, literally and figuratively. And his closing salvo in Michigan, dumping on Detroit, being that chaos agent that he tends to be, I don't think Michiganders are buying it. We know it's a close race for a variety of reasons. Kamala Harris has not even been the nominee for 80 days, and yet she's doubling down on a supply chain message, a manufacturing message. And honestly, she's running here like she's almost running for governor. She's in Michigan so much. We're wondering if she has a twin, which she doesn't, but she's very focused, and I think it's going to pay off.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot to be said about the presidential campaign, and we can talk about this a little bit more, Congresswoman, but there's an important Senate race, of course, that's happening as well. We saw new numbers from Suffolk University with USA Today showing the Congresswoman Slotkin leading former Congressman Mike Rogers by 2 points. This is so close, much like the presidential campaign, potentially too close to call. Our viewers on Bloomberg TV and YouTube getting a look at that poll right now. Does the top of the ticket decide the Senate race in your state?
Well, it certainly is going to have a big impact. And one thing we know about Alyssa Slotkin is that she has been rigorously campaigning for a year and a half now, working to fill the shoes of Debbie Stabenow. And I believe she has fulfilled the goal of running an immaculate campaign. Michigan, a lot of people don't realize geographically, is the largest state east of the Mississippi. We've got 10.8 million people. We've got metropolitan hubs in Detroit and in Grand Rapids. And then we've got a lot of farm country. We've got a beautiful up north Michigan. And Alyssa has covered a lot of ground. And she's also run a very disciplined campaign. And I'm thrilled to call her one of my dear friends in Congress. I was one of the first members of Congress to endorse her. I have stood by her every step of the way and have loved working on her campaign. One thing we know about Mike Rogers is that he's nowhere. And people don't even know if he lives in Michigan. He served in Congress at the turn of the century and then has just sort of been gone for the last 10 years. People don't know who he is. They know who Alyssa is. They know she's got a national security background, that she's focused on supply chains. She worked really hard to lower the cost of prescription drugs with that Inflation Reduction Act, getting Medicare to be that negotiator. And so I'm confident in Alyssa in a big way. I in her race, and I'll tell you, I'm not buying that Suffolk poll. I'm really not, particularly.
So you don't think it's a 2-point race? Well, I'll tell you what. We would love to invite former Congressman Rogers to join us to respond to that. Something important happened in the nation's capital here that will have a direct impact on your state, Congresswoman. Today, the Supreme Court declined to remove RFK Jr. from the ballot in Michigan as well as Wisconsin. There are some out there, some Republicans who are rather concerned about this, knowing how close the presidential contest is in these two states, including your state of Michigan. 1 or 2 percentage points for RFK Jr. could, in fact, make the difference. Did the Supreme Court just help Kamala Harris win the election?
Well, the ballots have been printed, and people have been absentee voting since September. And RFK Jr. sued way too close to the deadline. The ballots had been printed. Votes were just about to get started. And it's no surprise that the U.S. Supreme Court threw this out. There was no way to remove him from the ballot. And frankly, he goofed up. He said he was running for president. He said he was running for president first as a Democrat, then as an independent. And then he came out and endorsed Donald Trump. And he's vying to be his head of the FDA, which is frightening, given that he talks about eating bears and whales and all these conspiracy theories that will not serve the American people well. And you're right. He might very much damage Donald Trump. I will say that several of the homes in Oakland County that I drove past all the time with his signs no longer have his signs. But that doesn't mean that people, when they walk in to the voting booth, aren't going to check his name and that he's not going to take away from someone. One thing that I've seen in the years that I have been on the ballot is that person, like the RFK Jr., who's really not supposed to be on there, but is on there, they end up taking a lot more than you think. There's always a frustration with the two-party system. We see that time and time again. We're obviously working very hard on the Democrat side to convince everyone to vote for Kamala.
Well, now that he's so closely associated with Donald Trump, though, Congresswoman, that's advantage Harris, is it not?
It's going to advantage Harris for sure, and I think that his presence on the ticket is going to have an impact, and it's hard to know how much, but we'll see on Election Day. My guess is that it'll be more than we expect, just because people go into the polls and they check off a name, and it's going to take from Donald Trump. Yeah. And it's a close election, and frankly, we're all just wondering where Donald Trump is. You know, he's off in Madison Square Garden with a goofy rally saying hateful things, and his message isn't making it through to Michiganders, and Kamala Harris is plowing here. And CNN poll. Well,
he was in Green Bay, Wisconsin today. I think he's going to be there with Brett Favre later on. But I do want to ask you, Congresswoman, if you're concerned about the remark that Joe Biden made last night. The White House has tried to clarify this, saying his remark about garbage was directed to the comedian who is at Madison Square Garden, not all Trump supporters. But you know how this stuff goes. A lot of people are trying to reach for the next deplorables. This is the cycle that we're in, and perception is reality in this case. Should Joe Biden stay in the White House for the rest of this campaign?
Well, he is absolutely going to stay in the White House, and he's going to continue to fulfill his duties as president. We see him doing a great job, and we know one thing is for certain, that it's Donald Trump and Kamala Harris who are on the ticket for next week and for November. And I'll just say that the line that the comedian used in Madison Square Garden behind a podium that said Trump for president has inflamed many across this country, particularly of Puerto Rican descent. And it is the final moments. That was supposed to be a closing salvo of the Trump campaign, and it was a major flop. And I have been hearing that on Fox News to MSNBC in terms of what a disaster that has been. And so I really believe that we have to continue to drive this over the finish line and remind people that we need consistency and clarity and real leadership in the White House. And we just don't get that from Donald Trump. If you want to put comedians up on the stage, then run a late night talk show. Don't run for president.
6 days out with Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of the swing state of Michigan. Congresswoman, thank you as always. Coming up, we'll reflect on Vice President Harris's address from the Ellipse on the National Mall last night, the optics and the messaging with Nia-Malika Henderson, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This election is more than just a choice between two parties and two different candidates. It is a choice about whether we have a country rooted in freedom for every American or ruled by chaos and division.
Vice President Kamala Harris, around this time yesterday, speaking with the White House as her backdrop from the Ellipse on the National Mall, making her closing arguments with less than a week to go here for why voters should choose her over former President Trump. That's, of course, where he stood on January 6, 2021. Joining us now is Bloomberg Opinion's Nia-Malika Henderson. It's great to have you, Nia, following the speech. You're writing about this in a pretty positive way. I wonder your thoughts on the optics here. A lot of people question this idea of going to Washington. Why associate yourself with this? But the administration said it was an opportunity for her to appear presidential, to be in that space. Did they succeed in that way?
You know, I think they did, and to sort of rewrite the meaning of that space and what it holds in American culture and sort of in the American imagination at this point. It was the site where Donald Trump launched this mob to lay siege to the Capitol on January 6th. So there she was, implicitly saying, this is what Donald Trump did, and this is the kind of president I would be. At some point, she turned around to the White House that was in the back of her and asked Americans to imagine what it would be like to have her in the White House. She would show up with a to-do list. He would show up with an enemies list. So I thought it was very effective. I mean, sort of the atmospherics of it. 75,000 people showed up there. So it was quite effective, I think.
You wonder the audience outside of the 75,000 people who were here. This has been cut up, spliced and diced in a lot of different ways for a speech that was given a lot of credit for its writing, but it was made to be consumed in whole as she tried to connect the dots from some pretty dark stuff to what she saw as an optimistic way forward. Did you have to actually see the entire speech to get it?
No. You know, I have been getting text messages from people sending me sort of TikTokified versions of the speech. A particular passage that has sort of gone viral in social media is this whole idea of America's roots, right? Turning loose a petty tyrant, overthrowing that whole idea of, the king should rule. And then through the generations, whether it was Selma, whether it was Stonewall, whether it was Seneca Falls, making America a more inclusive place. So that clip online, and it's sort of the tail end of her speech there, sort of the warm, the conclusion of it, where she's wrapping it up, but sort of revving people up around this idea of what kind of president she wanted to be.
I've only got 30 seconds, so I don't want to set you up. How much trouble did Joe Biden make for her last night?
It was not great. It was, some people are saying it's good for her because she was able to have this sort of sister soldier moment and stiff arm Joe Biden. But listen, there's been all of this debate about whether he should be out there or not. I think he's proving sometimes he's not
going to be in the residence maybe for the next 6 days. Sister soldier moment. I like that. Bloomberg Opinion's Nia-Malika Henderson with us at the table. Thank you so much. Find her column on the terminal and online. Coming up, we turn to the economic plans of both candidates with Republican Congressman Chuck Fleischmann right here on Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thank you for joining us. Early voting in Tennessee officially ends tomorrow, with more than 1.8 million people having already cast their ballots through early and absentee balloting, according to the Tennessee Secretary of State. We keep reminding you we're 6 days out, but of course this election is already over for millions of Americans. And joining us now for a closer look is Republican Congressman Chuck Fleischmann of Tennessee. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's good to have you here. These numbers are noteworthy. Well, thank you. The last time you were with us, we were talking about the devastation left behind by Hurricane Helene. There were questions about ballot access, about turnout. It appears Tennessee is doing pretty well, despite the arrival of that storm and the damage left behind, Congressman. Will this go down as a defining moment for Republicans and their use of early voting?
Well, yes. I think, fortunately, President Trump put out the clarion call early to vote early, and we are listening. The nation is listening. Tennesseans are resilient people. Our friends in North Carolina are resilient people. They are voting in record numbers early, and I think it's going to bode well for Republicans everywhere. In my great state, the great state of Tennessee, I will be reelected. Our great senior Senator Marsha Blackburn will win in a landslide. And of course, President Trump could, in fact, win this state by close to 30 points.
Well, that said, you mentioned Donald Trump's call to embrace early voting, but it's been a somewhat muddled message. Just as recently as a couple of weeks ago, he was calling it stupid, and he's tied this idea of early voting to fraud. Is this happening despite Donald Trump? Is it the RNC? Is it yourself that got Tennessee voters, Republican voters specifically, to embrace this?
Well, I've always enjoyed the opportunity to vote early because on Election Day, it's like my Super Bowl. I'm out shaking some hands, waving with people, having a great time, just experiencing our great constitutional republic. But the reality is Republicans, independents, conservative Democrats are so concerned about the direction of this country in the past 4 years under Biden-Harris that they do not want to see 4 more years of Harris in any way, shape, or form. So we're seeing people pour to the polls. It's incredible. I even had to wait a half hour to early vote. So really, it's about the economy, it's about immigration, and it's about getting Donald Trump back in the White House. I think, and I predict, an electoral landslide for Trump coming up on Tuesday. I feel it everywhere. Obviously, it's more pronounced in the Southeast, but Joe, the reality is all across Pennsylvania, I'm getting calls. It's Trump, Trump, Trump.
Well, I want to get into energy policy with you specifically, but just to follow up on what you just said, give us your prediction here. Everybody's got a gut right now because the polls aren't telling us who's going to win. You think it's an electoral landslide, Congressman? By what margin, and when do they call the race?
North of 300, I would say. Of course, I will take a win. A win is a win, and we get 4 more years of President Trump, and that would be great. But I will say north of 300 for President Trump. The United States Senate unequivocally will become Republican. 2 seats minimum, probably 4 or 5 if we have the kind of great night you probably saw where Michigan and Wisconsin moved into toss-up. Even Pennsylvania with Casey is on toss-up now. So I think Democrats are running scared. They're actually running away from the top of the ticket. We're going to have a good night. Now the nail-biter, candidly, that really affects me because as chairman of the Energy and Water Subcommittee on Appropriations, that chairmanship rests on us maintaining control in the United States House of Representatives. That will be, candidly, I think, a closer race. I feel better day by day, but it's going to be a close one.
I love this. We're riffing here with Congressman Fleischmann. That's a gut check, though, right? You're not basing that on internal polling. You're just taking the temperature, I think, of the voters you're talking with. You know, Donald Trump likes to say, and we've heard this a few times, the only way Democrats can win is if they cheat. Is that where we're at in this race?
I really think the last 4 years of failure under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, you've got somebody, you saw that yesterday in Joe Biden, that really doesn't know what he's saying. And when he says things that are detrimental, they literally have to hide him. They've been hiding him for quite some time now. The reality is our great nation needs leadership. We need economic vibrancy. We need foreign policy that our allies can cherish and our foes can fear. We need an energy policy that is robust, that will defeat inflation. We need so many things. I really think the average American, who may not be as conservative as I am, may not even be a Republican, wants a change in direction. And that change in direction are fond memories of Donald Trump and his 4 years.
Hopefully that means that no one's going to be cheating. But you mentioned energy, so let's get into that. We've heard a lot about energy during this campaign. Kamala Harris, Donald Trump sharing their plans if they were to be elected. Let's give our listeners and viewers a taste of that, and we'll follow up, Congressman. Here they are.
As we know, the electrical grid and what we need to do in terms of restoring and building up and investing in the workforce and the economy includes focusing on everything that we've been talking about as a general matter around investing in a clean energy economy.
I will cut your energy prices in half within 12 months. And to bring back millions of jobs, we will give our companies the lowest taxes, the lowest energy costs, the lowest regulatory burdens, and free access to the best and biggest market on the planet.
I know this is a specialty of yours, Congressman, as a member on the Energy Committee in the House. Paint the picture for me, because I filled up my tank today for $2.84 in Northern Virginia. We're watching gas prices fall, and you know it's my job to remind everybody that we're pumping a record amount of oil and gas in this country. So what would a Trump victory mean for the energy sector beyond what we're already seeing?
An excellent question, Joe. I cherish my role as perhaps America's energy congressman, but I believe in all of the above. But the call goes out. Demand for energy in our state, in our nation, in the world, and I've traveled all over the world, is going to boom. We need more energy, and that means electricity. That means we've got to make sure that we have fossil fuels, which are abundant in this country, oil and natural gas. I particularly care about clean energy in the nuclear sphere. I think we've got to get a ramped up nuclear policy in this country. I'm leading in that endeavor with the energy and water bill. But renewables are part of that. What we need to do is realize the demand for energy is going to be staggering. If we do not keep up with that, with the demand, with an adequate supply, we will fall behind as a country. So whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, you've got to embrace the fact that we are going to need more energy in the United States. Donald Trump will deliver that. Candidly, Kamala Harris will not.
I want to hear more about nuclear in our remaining moment here, Congressman. It's important what you just said, because we have analysts here on Bloomberg TV and radio on the daily saying you can't have all the data centers, you can't have the AI without the power, and the way to do that is, in fact, going to require access to nuclear. How do you mainstream nuclear technology, once again, from your position in the House of Representatives?
Nuclear power is safe, it's reliable, it's carbon-free, it's abundant. However, it can be expensive. That first of a kind, whether it's a Generation 3 reactor or a Generation 4 reactor, we're going to need fuel, we're going to need designs, we're going to need workforce. I'm privileged to have the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, at 47% of its generation in nuclear. That is great, but these new modular reactors, advanced reactors, micro reactors are going to be easier to build. They're going to be easier to service, easier to license, less expensive. Now, we still need the bigger nuclear power plants, but nuclear has got to be part of the solution. And the best part of it, Joe, is our friends on the left who fight us on everything are joining us on nuclear. They come to my conferences, they come to my caucuses. I chair 7 or 8 nuclear-related caucuses, so I join everyone in America to take a great look at new nuclear. We need it for the future, and more importantly, the rest of the world is moving in that direction. Our foes, Russia and China, are moving in this space rapidly. Our friends, French and the South Koreans, are very proficient in this area. America's got the best technology. Much of that technology is actually not even new technology. It comes from Oak Ridge. I represent Oak Ridge from the late 1960s. Bottom line, we need new nuclear. We need it in abundance, and we need it now.
Let's keep this conversation going, Congressman. Republican Chuck Fleischmann of Tennessee, we thank you, as always, for the time on Bloomberg. Coming up 6 days out, we'll have a look at how Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are shaping their final messaging with our political panel. They're next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
America, we know what Donald Trump has in mind. More chaos, more division, and policies that help those at the very top and hurt everyone else. I offer a different path, and I ask for your vote.
The problem is, if we had more of these idiots running our country, you won't have a big and best market anymore, because we're a nation in decline. We're going to turn that around, so you're going to be so proud of this country.
The contrast. Kamala Harris speaking from the Ellipse on the National Mall last night. Donald Trump in Allentown, Pennsylvania, right at the same time. Both candidates making their final pitch to voters, of course, now with less than a week to Election Day and millions having already voted. As we assemble now our political panel, Sarah Chamberlain is back with us, President, CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership and Republican strategist, alongside Jim Kessler, co-founder of Third Way, Democratic strategist. Wonderful to have both of you here. Jim, take me back to last night. I want you to frame the significance of this speech, because it's been clouded by this whole garbage controversy, the flap involving Joe Biden. He's not on the ballot. The importance of last night.
She had a great speech. Look, she is still making the case and making her final argument to voters. She is still not a totally known quantity among sort of less propensity voters. So this was a good speech for her. It was a great night for her. She did an excellent job. She got her message out. I think it helped her. The Democratic vibe is very positive in the last few days, and I think that helped the vibe. I think Joe Biden's comments was, a little speed bump. I didn't think that helped her at all.
She had an opportunity to respond to it this morning. Did she use her time well?
Yes, she cleaned it up very, very well. And look, I think it's clear that Joe Biden meant the people on stage, not the people in the audience. I think it's also clear Joe Biden's got to get off the stage. He's not helping. Well, it's time for him to step aside for the next 7 days.
As soon as he is off the stage, it's interesting. I was wondering if he might come out on the balcony while she was talking out there last night, because he wasn't invited. What is your membership doing with this moment? I'll ask you about Trump, but the garbage thing. Donald Trump's raising money on this. Are your frontline members offended by it? Does it change anything in this race?
They're not really raising money or doing much on it. It's Joe Biden. There's a reason Joe Biden is not the candidate. He's an old man that really does need to exit stage. So they're not trying to exploit that at all. They actually feel a little bit sorry for him. Though it was certainly damaging to the vice president. That's without question.
Well, Donald Trump went to Allentown last evening, and a lot was made of the comments at Madison Square Garden a couple of days earlier, knowing that Allentown is a Latino majority city. They had to close the schools. There were a couple of protesters out there. This thing is so close that there is a belief that some of the insulting, I'll say, jokes, if you want to use that term, at Madison Square Garden might actually activate some Latino voters to side with Kamala Harris. How do you look at this?
That's certainly a possibility. We have some members down in Miami that tweeted about it. They were really offended. They're obviously Puerto Rican. We had one in New York, the Esposito, who tweeted against it. But I will say Donald Trump did not say it. It was said at his event. He needs to come out and clean that up maybe a little bit better than he has, because this really could swing Pennsylvania, and Donald Trump needs Pennsylvania to win.
Well, it sure seems like it. You've got an opportunity here, and Pennsylvania is so tight, it's maybe a 1-2 point race. It's a statistical tie. Does an event like this swing the state to Harris?
I think it helps. I mean, if you look at Donald Trump, he's got a ceiling. He won Pennsylvania once in 2016. A lot of it was because third-party candidates were in the race and taking some vote. He's never gotten to 49% in Pennsylvania. So where those undecided voters are going to go, and a lot of those are Latino voters. So I think Harris's chances in Pennsylvania, I think, are pretty good, and they got better because of Madison Square Garden.
Well, let's talk about third-party candidates, because the Supreme Court says RFK Jr. stays on the ballot in Michigan and Wisconsin. That could decide the race, no?
It certainly could. It certainly did in 2016. I mean, Hillary Clinton lost because the third-party candidates were there. So this would be interesting to see. And who does he really pull from? He's endorsed Trump. So is he pulling from Trump, or does he pull from Harris? And I actually don't know which side he's going to pull from.
Despite his association with Donald Trump, you would think that might advantage Kamala Harris. You've spent a lot of this cycle worried about the impact of third-party candidates. It was really the no labels movement, but here we go again.
Right. So I think the greater impact in Michigan and Wisconsin will be Jill Stein, who's the Green Party candidate. And
can she pull 1% away from Harris?
Well, in 2016, in the 7 swing states, she averaged 1.1% of the vote.
That's all you need.
Okay. Chase Oliver on the Libertarian side in 2020 in the 7 swing states averaged 1.1% of the vote from the right, so they may offset each other. I will say this about Jill Stein and Democrats. Democrats were caught unawares about Jill Stein in 2016. Not this time. There's a lot of, if you're going to be voting for Jill Stein this time around, you know that she is being funded by Trump. You know that she is supported by Putin. You know she's a hypocrite on climate, because Democrats are making that known.
Taking out ads against a third-party candidate late in the cycle is Pretty remarkable. It tells us where we're at. Coming up with our panel, we have a lot more to talk about, including a look down ballot. The key congressional races might shake up the leadership on Capitol Hill, and our political panel will have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The secret is a series of Tele-Town halls. President Trump, when he met with us at the Capitol Hill Club some months back, it was a great team meeting between the House members and President Trump, and then he later had one with the Senate. This is something that President Trump did last election cycle, and he is going to up his game even more so this cycle, to have Tele-Town halls with at-risk seats, members who are trying desperately to get back to Congress to increase our majority in the House, because Lord knows the slim majority that we have right now is not working.
Tele-Town halls. That's the secret. Republican Congressman Mark Alford with us last night on Balance of Power, making news. He said, revealing the secret that Donald Trump alluded to sharing with House Speaker Mike Johnson during the big rally last weekend at Madison Square Garden. Back with us, our political panel, Sarah Chamberlain and Jim Kessler. Sarah, the congressman said, I texted Speaker Johnson before I came on with you to find out, and here's what he said. Is that for real? The Tele-Town halls are the secret weapon to end this campaign?
Well, he's certainly doing some of them, but I would say in the Republican Main Street Partnership members who are fighting to hang on, they're not doing Tele-Town halls with him.
Okay.
I mean, they're fighting for Survivor New York and Oregon and some of the seats in California. A Tele-Town hall would not help them.
So frontliners aren't showing up with Donald Trump in a lot of cases.
The top seats that are endangered are not doing Tele-Town halls with Trump. They're not against Donald Trump, certainly, but they're not embracing him. They need the Democrats to cross over and vote for them.
So what went through your mind when you heard Donald Trump talk about a secret that he had with Mike Johnson that would reveal itself after the election?
Well, Mike Johnson went out today and said that he was going to kill Obamacare and take a blowtorch to it. So
reform, I think, was the word he chose to use.
Yes, massive reform. And then he said, someone said Obamacare, and he goes, Obamacare no, meaning like Obamacare gone.
Okay.
So if that's the secret, then Obamacare just got put on the map for the presidential campaign and the congressional race. We'll see if there's going to be a walk back over there. That could be the October surprise, that Obamacare is suddenly, high on the agenda for Republicans. So that would be a problem.
Interesting. Neither of you reached for certifying election results, knowing the role that Mike Johnson attempted to play in 2020. Is that a concern of yours?
It is not this time. No. There's already been a lot of Republicans who have signed the letter, so they will confirm them. And we have to remember, Biden is in the White House. He will send protection. The vice president is the one who now has to accept them. So it is a Democratic-controlled White House going into this. So you'll see a different vibe, thank God, than January 6th of 2021.
Chuck Fleischmann was on with us a little bit earlier before you joined us. Republican from Tennessee, even he expressing a little bit of concern about the tight situation in the House. He thinks that Donald Trump will take the White House. He sees himself winning re-election, but he's unsure about the party maintaining control. The stakes are high here. It couldn't be closer, Sarah. What keeps you up at night?
Oh, many things.
Yeah.
I do think probably we get the White House. We're definitely going to get the United States Senate. The House, we're going to either win by 3 to 5 votes or lose by 3 to 5 members. It's that close. I mean, we really have to encourage everyone to turn out and vote, because your vote really matters in a lot of these districts, because it's going to be extremely tight.
It could be 5 in either direction.
It could be.
Which is amazing.
Which will be a problem for whomever the speaker is, to be honest. Because everybody talks about our far right. There's also a far left that doesn't get as much media attention, but they will be loud if they've got control.
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. We're talking a lot about the House here. It could be some time before we know, by the way, who controls the House. As a former creature of the Senate, do you buy the conventional wisdom that this flips Republican?
I think it's hard for Democrats to keep the Senate. Like, the math just isn't great. I think a good night for Democrats is ending up at 49. It's possible they'll stay at 50. John Tester, that is a tough race. He is a great candidate. Polls usually have him either down 4 or, to even. Sherrod Brown, I think he'll pull it out.
Okay.
But, it's not easy to win when at the top of the ticket the Democrat is losing, and that's going to be happening in Montana and in Ohio.
Yes, right.
But so I'd say Democrats have a shot to keep the Senate, but it's a shot.
So you're not buying this Texas-Florida talk, I'm guessing.
I think Texas is possible, and Florida too, because the thing about waves, there could be a late-forming wave. They don't form until the last week. You don't see it until then.
Jim Kessler, great conversation. Sarah Chamberlain, great panel. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us today. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter for a lot more on the stories we're discussing on the terminal and online. And thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and Radio.